Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, September 11th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the generic congressional ballot. FiveThirtyEight has released this generic congressional ballot tracker from the beginning of 2021 up until now that will extend into November. And for a very long period of time, the Republican Party had maintained an electoral advantage and popular vote advantage over the Democratic Party for 9 consecutive months. From November 2021 to August 2022, the Republican Party reigned supreme. They were above the Democrats, and they were leading, and at certain points in time looked like they were steadily increasing their numbers to outpace the Democrats ahead of the midterm elections. Then came a change in public sentiment on both President Biden and the Democrats nationwide. And as of early August, the Democrats reflipped the majority in terms of the generic ballot in their favor and have continued it now for over a month for the first time in 9 consecutive months. This shows that the generic ballot lead for the Democratic Party wasn't just a one-time thing. In fact, it is higher now than at any point in time in the past 10 months alone. The Democrats are in a more beneficial position, even getting 45% of the vote, contrary to numbers in the early months of 2022. You're talking January, February, where Democrats were hovering around 43 and 42%, and at different points in time were even lower than that. But ultimately, Democrats have increased. Republicans, on the other hand, have certainly decreased because at different points, Republicans were at 46%. Today, they're at 44%. So looking at this Democrat lead of a point nationwide, it obviously isn't enough to say that this 1 point lead is the only news bit that is accompanied by this 1 month lead. Because this 1 month lead, what it has done effectively is change public narrative, change the way that people look at individual races ahead of these midterm elections and vote in these absentee ballots that are starting to become disseminated across the country. An overwhelming portion of this country will have voted before the November election date, contrary to years prior, because of the fact that COVID-19 really ramped up the usage of mail-by-vote methods of voting, and also has really just helped the Democratic Party in general because it locks in a vote, and it's also a vote that they can steadily rely on time and time again. The Democrats at this point being up a point isn't, again, enough for me to say that I think that you've seen some substantial type of flipping or trajectory change or course correction for the Democrats, but rather that I think that there is something to be said about what this means for Democrats moving forward, and also what has been done just generally in the past. I've decided to bring up the FiveThirtyEight forecast for the sake of this video to look at the current ratings for Democrats across both chambers of Congress. You have the House of Representatives, you have the Senate elections. Right now, the Democrats have about a 70% chance at winning control of the Senate, a chamber that they currently hold by the narrowest majority possible in American politics. In the House, you have the Democrats in the majority, in which they have held the narrowest House majority in the 21st century, one of the narrowest we have seen in the past half century. So for Democrats to be in this position where you are starting to see an increase in possibility that they win, you have to understand that they are coming from extreme and extraordinary circumstances that would otherwise make this a very solid lockdown for Republicans in quite literally any other type of election year. And honestly speaking, probably 2020 and 2016 as well. Those presidential elections where some people thought Democrats might perform better in those, or at least in the past, performed better than what they might expect for these upcoming midterms, where that no longer is the case. It is a feat in itself. The Democrats do have a 1 in 4 shot at winning control of the House or maintaining control of a chamber that, again, is the narrowest majority during the entirety of this century. It's fascinating to say the least, but it also is something that wasn't always there. I wanted to bring up what the FiveThirtyEight forecast looked like about a month ago when we had the Democratic Party just reclaim the majority in the generic ballot for the first time in 9 consecutive months. And at that point, the Democrats were still the favorites to win the Senate. They had about a 60% chance to the Republican Party's 40%. And in the House of Representatives, things started to look better. Democrats had about a 21% chance to the Republican Party's 79%. Now, the difference between a month ago and now aren't super different, largely because the generic ballot also isn't super different either. The Democrats were up by less than a point. Now they're up by about a point. So you're talking about a relative, 1 point difference in terms of the two circumstances. So I've decided to go back even further to show you what it looked like when the Republicans were leading on the generic ballot. In fact, the time at which the FiveThirtyEight forecast officially released when Republicans were leading by 2.1% nationwide. That's about a 3-point swing from where it was on June 30th, 2022 versus now. And here it is. This is what we find if we go back to June 30th, 2022, the first ever released forecast by FiveThirtyEight for 2022 that finds that Republicans have an 87% chance in winning control of the House of Representatives to the Democrats' 13%. The chances for the Democrats have effectively doubled in this 3-point swing nationwide. And it only looks like it's going to steadily increase for Democrats as we get closer and closer to November. But the big shocker here isn't the House. We have already come to the conclusion that Republicans will win control of the House of Representatives no matter what Democrats try to do. But I will say that that is no longer the sentiment I now hold. I think that there is definitely a possibility Democrats do retain control of the House. I don't think it's the favorite to happen, but it's no longer out of the question, whereas at this point in time, it certainly was. But the Senate elections were where you really see, again, a super significant difference. Because in the 538 forecast, it was regarded as a toss-up. Not only was it a toss-up, but that Republicans were ahead of Democrats. It was a 53% chance for the GOP to Democrats at 47%. Think about where we are now versus where we were. 69% for the Democrats, contrary to 47%. The House of Representatives, 26% for Democrats, contrary to 13%. Doubling the chances in the House. Increasing your chances dramatically in the Senate to now where you are the favorite. Not only the favorites, but a very solid favorite. When Republicans were the favorite here, at most it was 60%. By that time, 538 had not released their forecast, but was still calculating and running models from June onward. But 53% versus 31%, that's a significant drop-off for the GOP. 87% down to 74%, that is a significant drop-off. The House is a much harder battle for national Democrats, but it is no longer out of the question. Things that have a 1 in 4 chance of happening happen all the time. And you can see it to be true, and the reason why is because national sentiment is changing. That's what this generic ballot is telling us. It isn't just an indicator of the popular vote, but also an indicator as to how races are going to go. There is a very clear, well-established correlation between generic ballot achievement for both parties and their actual respective expectation to win seats and actual election results when they do win such seats. Because Democrats won the generic ballot back in 2020 by 3.5%, which led to them maintaining control of the House of Representatives and winning control of the Senate. So if these numbers get better for national Democrats, which they have increased by about a point in about a month, give it 2 more months, we're about 60 days out till the midterm elections, Democrats could reasonably be up, based off the trajectory right now, by 3 points on election day, which means the House would absolutely be in play because it's a similar environment to where we were back in 2020. Now, the president's approval rating is still bad for national Democrats. We have to recognize this every time we talk about the Democratic Party and their chances at victory in these midterm elections, because quite frankly, President Biden has not been approved of since July of 2021. So it's been a long time coming for the GOP to get this majority in the generic ballot, but also, quite frankly, when you look at some of these numbers where Republicans were, at different points up nationally by 2 to 3 points, Joe Biden was still unpopular. So why might this be? Well, it's a bit deeper than the question of Biden, because you find that in states such as Pennsylvania or Arizona or North Carolina or Ohio or Iowa, where there are coinciding polls that ask the same people, how would you vote in 2024 and how would you vote in 2022? And consistently, without fail, President Biden underperforms these Democrats in 2022 by 3, 4, sometimes 5 points statewide. You have, Biden losing to Trump by 13 in Iowa, but Chuck Grassley only winning by 8. You have Biden losing in Pennsylvania by 5, but Fetterman up by sometimes 8, 9 points. Reasonably speaking, 4 to 5 points. You are talking super substantial drop-offs between the question of Biden and Democrats. And the only conclusion we can arise at, considering that Democrats are performing better now in the generic ballot than they were even at a time where President Biden's approval rating was better than it is today, is because of the fact that President Biden is no longer as associated with the Democratic Party in terms of a referendum against him as it once was. Because it changed between the time in which the popularity rating got better for Biden, the generic ballot got better for Democrats, a woman's right to choose across the nation. And you can also see this to be a very evident factor in special elections before the Supreme Court decision and after. Because in the pre-Dobbs average, this is a calculation of the shifts in all of the special elections prior to the Dobbs v. Jackson decision that overturned Roe versus Wade, Republicans improved by 2 points. Democrats only maintain a 4-seat majority when they won the popular vote by 3.5 and a 0-seat majority in the United States Senate. So when you see an improvement of even just 0.1, Republicans flip the Senate, flip the House, and then it's gone. This was an improvement of 2 points, and as we got closer to the November election, the California 22nd District, the Texas 34th District, a Republican improvement of 14 and 10 points. The Democrats lost a seat. The Republicans flipped a congressional seat in Texas's 34th. And it looks like we were on track for a super solid red wave year. But then Dobbs happened. Then the Supreme Court made their decision and voters were outraged. Keep in mind, 60% of this nation plus self-identifies as pro-choice. That means there are Republicans, independents, and certainly Democrats that affiliate and identify as pro-choice. Look at all of these results following the Dobbs decision. Nebraska's first, Democrats improved by 12 points. Minnesota's first, Democrats improved by 11 points. Alaska, Democrats flipped a seat. Unheard of in a year that's meant to be against your party. Democrats improved by 18 points. New York's 19th, Democrats flipped not by the overall seat holder, but in terms of the partisan lean, went from red to blue. Democrats improved by 6. And in New York's 23rd, Democrats improved by 9. The overall average post the Dobbs decision, Democrat plus 11. That is what changed the trajectory of these races, and that is reflected in our generic ballot. It shows us that public sentiment has changed, but for many people's ideas and classifications for the generic ballot, it's seen as a lagging indicator. A lagging indicator because it takes a lot to break the average. It takes 7 to 8 consecutive polls showing a different result from what the 7 to 8 polls prior to had shown in order to shift the narrative. Because looking at the polling averages and what polls are being calculated into question here, you have about 2 polls here that show the Republicans ahead by 4 and 2. The Democrats have about 5 polls here that showed them up, which means that these 2 polls, these outliers per se, are not enough to weigh it down and shift it altogether. Even though 2 out of the 7 polls are telling us that Republicans are going to win, the average has the Democrats ahead. So even if some polls were more accurate than others at times following the Dobbs decision, for instance, when you take a look at polls prior to the flip on the overall average, you will see that Republicans pretty consistently led there with very few and infrequent polls that showed Democrats ahead. For instance, you had polls in July that showed, Democrats leading, but Republicans still leading on a pretty consistent basis. +8, +10, +1, +1, +5. Democrats started to ramp up their numbers. And if you look at the average, though, what you found was that Republicans, again, maintained a 9-month advantage over national Democrats until recently. Marking this 1-month period, actually a little bit over 1 month because I forgot to make the video on the time in which one month happened, you have seen super substantial changes. The Senate looks similar in terms of chances, but an increase for Democrats. The House looks similar, but an increase for Democrats. But compared to when this this forecast first dropped, when Republicans were up by just 2 points, now Democrats are up by 1. A 3-point shift may not necessarily be perceived as this overwhelming and groundbreaking shift, but it absolutely was. Because at that time, Republicans were going to win the Senate. And at that time, they were going to expand their number of seats in the House to upwards of 230, 240 seats under consideration here. The average had the Republican Party leading, I don't know if we can find it here, the average had the Republican Party leading by about, 6 points nationwide. Today, that has been reduced down to just 3. We can actually see here, the forecast here shows Republicans expected to win by just 2.9 instead of 6.2. That's nearly a 4-point drop-off. And the average seats for the GOP, 237 compared to before, or now, which is 227. Democrats are just 10 seats away from retaining the majority. Previously, they were 20 away. A very, very different point in time. So I hope what you take away from this is that the generic ballot, as much as it is an indicator, is not always on top of things, but definitely indicates the country is moving in a different direction. It's not just the popular vote, and it's not just the House elections, but it's also many other elections that are along with it. You will also see this to be true when you look at the governor elections here. Let's see if it'll take us here on the web archive, because I'd be fascinated to look. For instance, the state of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro had about a 73% chance at winning there. Today, that's jumped up to 86. You take a look, for instance, at a state such as, let's say, Arizona. Kari Lake at 56, Katie Hobbs at 44. I think you might actually see a similar result now. Actually, no, Katie Hobbs ahead, but still pretty close, but still an improvement for Democrats. Nevada, Steve Sisolak has a 65% chance. Back then, he had about a 58% chance. My point is that in practically every single race here, what you found was that the Democratic Party has improved relative to where they were previously. Does it have to do with the generic ballot? Probably. Definitely has to do with the change in public sentiment, and especially in the swing and competitive seats, states, and districts. It matters. It matters a lot, and the generic ballot can show that to us. And now that Democrats have established this level of lead, this advantage over the GOP for 1 month straight, they have done what many political pundits thought was impossible and changed the trajectory of this midterms. Not to the extent that I think the House goes to the Democrats, but certainly to the extent that I think it's much more in play than it was before. And we're at a convergence point where the next 2 months will define if Democrats do, in fact, defy all expectations and maintain control of the House. It is no longer an impossibility, whereas very much was before. When you take a look at the numbers from 2 months ago, 3 months ago, or practically half a year ago. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.